All right. So I'm gonna try to keep it really simple, but anxiety is basically it's just the stress response to seeing something that is threatening our safety or feeling like something is threatening our safety. And safety doesn't just have to be like physical safety, like someone's coming up and trying to punch me in the face. It could also be psychological safety, right? Like I don't belong. Someone hates me. Someone is trying to get rid of me. Like I'm going to lose a family member. My family is going to get split up, right? So I think that the anxiety that's happening right now collectively is very, very valid because there is very real language that is showing this mindset of you don't belong here and you're not safe. And it does not help that we are living in a world right now where social media and all the online presence. Like people can say whatever they want. People can post whatever they're gonna think is gonna get the most likes. And because of our stress response, like people are going to pay attention to the scary, the fear, right? Because we were wired to survive. And like I said, anxiety is one of the things that helps us survive. It's also really interesting. I've heard with like new motherhood or new parenthood in specific that anxiety is actually really good for parents because if we didn't have anxiety, like our kids may be like walking towards the street and we'd be like, oh well, right? So it's kind of good that we have a little bit like, oh no, 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 vete pa' acá, right? Like, don't do that because it has kept us alive. And I'll talk a little bit about like why there are moments when it's not good. But just to normalize, like everybody has their own version of anxiety. It's triggered by different things. And if we didn't have anxiety, like that's why I put these little pictures there. Like we'd be picking up random snakes from the floor. We'd be driving really fast at night and not caring. We wouldn't pay our bills, right? Like we wouldn't study for tests. We wouldn't prepare for work interviews. So a little bit of anxiety is normal. So I hope that that also makes sense. And I really like this visual. If anybody has heard about the window of tolerance, I just think it's such a good one. I used to teach this to kids all the time. We called it flipped lid. So it's like when we're calm, like we're able to think rationally. Like if somebody says something mean, we can say like, that's not nice, walk away, whatever, right? But there will be things in life that will cause us to what we call flip our lid. So instead of thinking rationally, now we're kind of in this stress and survival response, right? We're like fight, flight, or freeze usually are like the main ones. So what's happening right now is that a lot of people are being thrown into this high anxiety or anger or like flashbacks even because we're getting triggered. And there's even some people too that are kind of going down to the hypo arousal, which is more like we start to get numb, we start to get depressed, we feel like nothing really matters anymore. And that's where it can get kind of scary because it's really hard to see the light in those dark places. But I think just like validating, first of all, that we're gonna get dipped into out of our window certain times. But the goal is not to get stuck there because survival is not thriving, right? Like when we're just surviving, we're not really always thinking about what's going to be good for me 30 years later, what's going to be good for me tomorrow, right? We're just trying to figure it out day by day. So I hope that that visual was helpful. And this next one has a lot of text, but I just wanted to give a good overview about how when we have too much anxiety and too often, it can interfere with our life and overall health. So this is something that I talk to my mom all the time about because she's in her mid 50s now and I think she's finally understanding like, oh, eso es ansiedad, like that's anxiety. Um and she's noticing how it's impacting her physical health, right? So some of the things that might be common um of how anxiety can look like is whenever you feel that your breathing is impacted. I personally feel like it feels like kind of like drowning, like you're about to drown or you're afraid of drowning. So your breathing is shorter, maybe more pressured, so you're not really filling your lungs. Difficulty concentrating. It can be really hard to concentrate and learn even when we are in survival. Uh, Nausea, other appetite, stomach, digestion issues, like that's all connected. It can really mess with just like your that functioning. Sleep issues. It could be that it's hard to sleep, hard to fall asleep, hard to stay asleep. Might have difficulty controlling the worrying. Your heart rate might be increased. This one, I think that it's important to note the distraction one, like, because I notice it even with myself. Sometimes it's hard to be in the present moment if you're distracted with all the what ifs, right? It can be hard to stay in the moment. And then there's avoidance. So avoidance and anxiety are like besties, is what I call them, because anxiety will tell you, no, 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 we don't want to do that. And avoidance will be like, yeah, let's not do that, right? So I have a very clear example. My health insurance bills, right? I have to call them, but it gives me so much anxiety to call them. So sometimes they just sit on the table and I'm like, I see them, but I don't want to call. And though it temporarily relieves the anxiety, long term, I still have to make the calls, right? So this can happen with things like your emotions. You might try to say like, no, 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 I don't feel any of that. I don't feel any of that, but it's gonna bubble up. It can happen with people, situations, confrontations. There's so many ways that it can come up. One way too that I feel like it's kind of avoidance is when we just start like doom scrolling or yeah, scrolling through our phone, because it's a form of numbing where we're just like not really even paying attention sometimes to what we're seeing, but we're just kind of stuck in this scroll. Muscle tension, your back, your shoulders, other body aches, headaches, that can all be impacted. Being super restless. I personally have been biting my nails a little bit more than I hoped. I was doing so good, but I gotta be nice to myself and be like, all right, you've just been a little bit extra anxious this week. It's okay. And then like the mindset, it also impacts your mindset, right? You're more likely to jump into the what ifs, the worst case scenario, the mind reading, like, oh, that person's gonna say this or whatever. Like, if I leave the house, this is gonna happen, and we start to spiral a little bit. Which isn't helpful because then we typically then avoid situations for like if we think like we already know what's gonna happen, then we're like, I just won't go to the park because it's too much, I don't want to have to deal with the potential scenarios that might happen. And more. So when our body is functioning like this, when our mind is functioning like this, we are also more likely to get sick and we're more likely to burn out because there's only so much that our body can do. And there's only so long that it can stay in this stress response before it being like, I need to slow down, I need a break, I need to recharge. And I think this is the part that's really important, especially if like you identify as first gen or Latina or any other identity where there has been like collective stress and generational trauma. So collective stress is right, just like a stressor that is impacting a group of people, like right now in politics. And generational trauma is things that have been passed down. So one example of generational trauma that I can think for myself is colonization, right? Like I know that my ancestors went were colonized and that there was trauma in that process. And that can show up different ways. So one way that I remember reflecting on is that suppressing your emotions can be a generational trauma response because let's say my mom was taught no llores, don't cry, push it down. Her mom said the same thing to her, and then now I have a difficulty expressing my emotions and I'm like, "Oh, snap. This is impacting me." But how we break cycles is we decide to say, "Hey, I know that this has been passed down, but I'm going to talk about my feelings anyway because it's important, right?" So whatever that looks like for you. But other examples of things that can cause collective stress and generational trauma is widespread fear and uncertainty, which is happening, natural disasters, which recently happened in the LA area, and even San Diego. Health threats, like when COVID happened. Well, I guess it was COVID 2019, 2020. That was a big like spike in anxiety for like the collective. Forced displacement, colonization, and deportation cannot impact you. Racism and hate crimes, negative media or negative representation, injustice, oppression, discrimination, being isolated, being disconnected, all the unknowns and safety concerns of new parenthood. I just wanted to throw it in there because I think that that's valid. That if you're like you're realizing, oh snap, I'm a new parent and I'm impacted by all these other areas, like they will layer and feel a little heavier at times. Big transitions in identity and roles, prenatal trauma, which I don't think a lot of people realize this, but like let's say let's say my mom went through something traumatic or yeah, while she was pregnant with me. When I was born, like my nervous system might be a little bit more sensitive just because it kind of has already started to learn like, hey, there is some unsafety happening. That's not to say that like if that happens, you can't still thrive in life, but it's just like that understanding of like, oh, well, okay, maybe my nervous system is a little bit more sensitive because of generational stuff. Violence, war, abuse, poverty, politics, and so much more. So those are all things that can impact your anxiety and maybe make it peak. So to jump into some of the things of like how do we cope with this, and like I mentioned, we'll have a discussion. But I my favorite way of thinking about anxiety these days is like it coming in waves, and it's like sometimes it's not just like one little wave, it's like a wave after wave after wave. And it can kind of feel like this is a lot. This is overwhelming. This is heavy. And sometimes there is no quick fix. There is no solution to it, right? Which I think it'd be nice to be able to be like, all right, my anxiety is gone because I took one deep breath, right? Um, but sometimes it doesn't go like that. And sometimes like the best thing we can do is just acknowledge that it's happening. So pausing, there's this phrase called name it to tame it. So just being like, all right, I think I'm feeling a little bit of anxiety right now. And then checking in with yourself with self-compassion because shaming and being like, oh, you're so stupid. Look at you feeling anxiety. There's nothing to be scared of. That's not helpful. That is not helpful. But if you tell yourself like, all right, like, I guess I'm feeling a bit anxious. That's valid. Like, there's a lot going on right now, or, there's a lot of uncertainty. What do I need? Like, what do I need right now? That can be one of the best things that you can do. And then from there, like, your next steps would be bringing attention to your breath. I think that the breath is one of the easiest starter points for you because our breath can help regulate the rest of our mind and our body, right? If we're able to take a deep breath, then we're able to communicate to the rest of ourselves that like we're safe. But I also acknowledge that sometimes taking a deep breath, especially when you're feeling anxious, is really hard. So if that's not helping, you can do any other form of mindfulness or grounding. So I'll just share like one or two. One of them that I really like is called the 5 4 3 2 1, where you literally like just start naming things around you. So using your five senses. So you name five things that you can see around you. You name four things that you can hear, three things that you can touch, two things that you can smell, and one thing that you can taste. There's that one. You can also just like look around and be like, all right, what are all the green things? Or where are my feet? What's around me? So anything really that brings your attention back to the present moment can be really helpful in times of anxiety because anxiety will try to throw you to the future and you say like, no, 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 I'm not in the future. I'm here. Like I'm safe can be really helpful. Mantras can be really helpful. Music. There's so many other ways. But I just wanted to make sure to share that. And then leaning on your specific cultural and spiritual practices. So whether that's I'm gonna cook up something delicious, un tecito, I'm gonna have a little FaceTime with my friend. I'm gonna tell a story. I'm gonna create prayer, sacred text, warmth. What I learned when I was learning about postpartum was that the cuarentena, those first 40-ish days after you have a baby, in traditional Mexican practice, it's like very common to warm up the mom, basically warm up her womb, warm up her body, because that brings like healing too. So never underestimate like all the little traditions that our parents grew up with, the vaporus or the sanasanas or the besitos, whatever it is, the música, like llorancheras, whatever it is you need, like lean on that because that's gonna be the best for you, right? Like everybody has their own culture and your identities intersect. So what might be good for me, like I mentioned it all the time, like Selena is so grounding to me because I just grew up with her. She just reminds me of home. She reminds me of family. So that's grounding to me. But somebody might be like, I don't know who the heck that is. And that's not relevant to me. So again, tweak it as you need for yourself. And then finding ways to complete the stress response cycle. So I think I mentioned that anxiety is a stress response. And sometimes the only way out of a stress response is through. So the only way to really cope with stress is to cope with it, is to face it. So some of the things along with this could be moving your body. It's one of my favorites, whether that's dancing, swaying. Related to that, it's not on this list, but music, singing, humming, all of that stuff is actually really good for your nervous system. And fun fact, there's like certain ranges that are extra good for you to sing, like for your nervous system, and a lot of the Disney tracks are within that. So I thought that was really cool when I learned that. Laughing. So with friends, with the show, whatever, creative, whether that's creating music, crafts, art, whatever it is, hugging, especially if you have a little. I'm so grateful for my toddler. She gives the best cuddles, and she's definitely been a sense of joy for me in these times. We just like seeing her smile, hugging her. So whoever that is for you, if you have a dog, if you have a pet, if you have a family member, crying actually is really good. Like I say a lot, like even the clouds cry sometimes. Sometimes it gets heavy, and it can be really cathartic to just let it out. And so many others. So we're gonna go through one more slide before we jump into the convo. But this is another visual that I really like about like fog in the woods because sometimes anxiety can feel like a fog because it's hard to see what's ahead. Even our own future can feel uncertain, but it can clear up. Like we won't be in the fog forever. It's just really hard to remember that in those moments. So some of the things that I feel like buffer us against anxiety taking over these days is remembering that we're not powerless. Like we have so much power in just who we are in our existence, contributing our piece of the puzzle. So whether that's teaching, advocating, helping, encouraging, loving on your people, or just deciding to exist and deciding to thrive, that could be your part of the puzzle. Cultivating joy, hope, play, rest, like love, that's all medicine and also fuel so that you can continue to fight from a place of love and not a place of fear. You can continue to parent from a place of love and not a place of fear, and fight for all the things that matter to you. One of the ones that I've recently been trying to do is limit my news and social media. So whether that's putting a little timer for yourself, putting a little app, whatever it is you need, just checking, the news once at the end of the day or once in the morning if you want to stay informed. But knowing that social media is not going to give us the most accurate information anyway. It's only part of the picture and it's opinions really at the end of the day. So just remember that, like, if you're starting to feel your anxiety peak, maybe it's a time to get off of social media just for a little bit, baby steps it, right? And then if it really gets to the point too where you're just like, this is just too much to handle and all of this stuff, I'm trying it and it's not working. That's when I would also say like maybe professional support, whether that's like therapy or even like whatever your culture already has, like curanderas or a pastor or whoever, just like somebody who can be there with you and help you maybe challenge those negative thinking patterns or process your triggers, process your trauma, gain the skills. For some people, medication is part of the the plan, at least until it gets less foggy, right? So those are some of the ways. I hope that something resonated. I'm gonna stop recording now.